So this is about representations of joy in popular music. So number one, I would like to point out for the few who perhaps are not familiar, popular music is something slightly different from folk music. There are two different areas in music practices, and they have to do mostly with, they are less related with the local tradition, less related with oral transferring of information, and more related with more complex production, hybridization of styles, and most of all, the development of an industry related with that. So between folk and pop, there is the same difference that goes between Prigimtinės and Andrius Mamontovas, to make it clear. And then there is this word, joy, which is a very interesting one. When we take any of the average dictionaries, we find many possible meanings, but there is plenty of overlapping between a word like joyful and words like content, happy, excited, glad, and so on. It's not my goal to try and solve these gray areas, but I think that commonsensically, perhaps most of us will agree that a feeling like joy has a lot to do with the extemporaneous, circumstantial, here and now event, identifiable event, as opposed, for instance, to happiness, which seems to be a condition reached in progress and a status that we aim at some point in our life if we are lucky. In other words, a person who is experiencing joy may also not be happy as a general condition, and a person who is happy as a general condition may not be joyful every single minute of their life. Having said that, I took a sample of 50 songs for preparing this presentation, 50 songs that are commonly associated with joyful feeling. But this is just kind of the technical official sample. As a matter of fact, in mind I had many more of these songs, because every time 50 were the songs that I repeatedly listened to for preparing this presentation. But whenever I would hear a relevant characteristic that would make me connect that characteristic with the feeling of joy and good feelings, etc., I would always think, okay, there is also this other song that does that, and this other, and this other. So officially there are 50 songs taken for this presentation, but virtually there's over 300 in mind, more or less. So browsing this song lyrics, I just built a simple word cloud of words that appeared more often in the lyrics. So some of them are very predictable: joyful, joy, brightness, happy, blah, blah, blah. Some others are interesting because they seem to relate to a dynamic approach: walk, run, dance. Some other express other meanings which somehow seem to be related semantically, so crazy, wild, real, and they seem to have some more connection with joy. But actually my presentation is not very much about the lyrics, and one of my main points is that the feel-good effect is actually provided mostly by the music. So with that in mind, the sample, I noticed that the sample could be divided in three main categories of joy conveyed. One was a physical type of joy, so music that required some physical appropriation, dancing or partying or workout, which is an increasingly popular form of listening, workout compilations, workout playlists, and so on. Another type was emotional, so very much the feel-good, mood-lifting, uplifting, self-help, mood therapy type of songs. And a bit less statistically, also the kind of spiritual joy that derives from religious or spiritual ecstasy, or this kind of strong involvement into some belief. Of course, these three categories are not mutually exclusive. As a matter of fact, they can all be present at the same time. So a song can be at the same time emotional, conveying emotional joy, but also physical joy, or spiritual and physical, and so on. And sometimes also the three of them. A typical example, not from popular music, but a typical example would be the Hymn to the Joy in the Ninth Symphony, in Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, which is clearly an expression of spiritual joy, but then it gives a lot of emotional joy. And surprise, surprise, if you select things like workout classical music compilation, it's always there. So there is also this relation with physical activity. Now, in my presentation, I would like to particularly focus on the emotional joy, because I think that exactly this feel-good mood therapy type of songs have become the most popular, particularly in this Spotify age. Most of us don't listen to entire albums anymore, so we don't follow anymore the narrative proposed by a single band or singer, which is, you know, song by song, ups and downs in mood, and anyway, whatever narrative they choose. We make the narrative because we build a compilation, and we make a narrative based on various criteria. One criterion is taste. We make a selection of the songs that we like the most. Another is genre. We all have our Latin American compilation or rock and roll compilation or whatever it is. And another one, an increasingly popular one, is exactly mood. We make compilations by mood. Can I ask you, does anybody have a relaxing compilation? Yeah, you select music by relaxation. And another one is exactly this uplifting, you know, the feel-good kind of compilation. Now, I'm focusing on emotional joy, but as you will see, there are often overlaps with physical and spiritual as well. So emotional is like the main focus, but not necessarily an exclusive focus. So let's see exactly what happens on Spotify. Again, not the main point of my presentation, but I was interested in problematizing one aspect. So if you have Spotify, you know that they have a lot of proposals for you, a lot of playlists based on algorithm that intercept the kind of music that you've been hearing, but also you can select a keyword, and then they offer you some playlists related with those keywords. So what if we put things like happiness or joy or feel good or uplifting? We get compilations that have this kind of images associated. Now, do you notice anything interesting, peculiar about this? I browsed quite a few of them. These are just 7 examples. I noticed 3 things that were particularly interesting. Number one, the age group, obviously. These are all young people in their 20s or 30s, very far from myself. So this is kind of obvious because Spotify has the main target of Spotify is the younger generation. Most of us have Spotify as well, but still, the majority of the users are from that age group. Now, more interesting, these people are all alone in the compilations. I found only a couple of examples where there were like 3 or 4 people in the image. Most of them were alone. So it's interesting that there is an association between uplifting music as a tool against what? Sadness? No, against loneliness specifically. Loneliness seems to be the great danger to fight back. Now, of course, again, the age group tells us that people in their 20s and 30s obviously find very problematic to be lonely. Their idea of joy is really being in company. Maybe once you reach your age, or even later, my age, you kind of have a more peaceful relation with loneliness. A typical example, when I was a teenager, I thought that going to cinema alone was the ultimate miserable thing to do. If you go to cinema alone, it means you are really pathetic. Now it is actually my favorite way to go to cinema. I don't like company in the cinema because usually it's a disturbing company when it comes to focusing on the movie. So I seek for being alone in cinema. Okay, so this is one thing, the age group for sure. But in general, it's interesting that loneliness seems to be the main enemy to fight with joy. And please remember that because it will become useful later on when I offer you some musical examples. The other thing about loneliness is that, of course, Spotify is also, in general, a solipsistic experience. We mostly use Spotify when we are by ourselves. Okay, we also use it for background when we have guests or for partying, but most of the usage of Spotify has to do with being alone. Maybe we are working or we are doing something else and we need some background. And finally, and of course, I needed a woman colleague to raise my attention, because the stubborn chauvinist that I am, I didn't notice that. These are mostly women there. So I was forced, thankfully, I was forced to reflect on that as well. There is some form of objectification of the woman in this kind of compilation. Why? Because the stereotype goes that women are more emotional. They are more in need of uplifting music. You know, in those days, before those days, after those days, there's always something going on. Not by chance, popular music studies are abbreviated PMS. Okay, sorry, very stupid joke. So anyway, women are represented and more in need of this kind of compilations, which is, one way of, again, stereotyping the female figure. Also, looking more attentively, I don't know if I'm pushing the analysis here, but I also have the feeling, seeing these images and the other ones that I checked, that when a man is represented experiencing joy, he's the one doing more eccentric, crazy things, like this guy on the bicycle. The women have to experience joy in a more quiet way, in a more homey way, in a swimming pool, or in a flower field. So again, there is some kind of stereotypization going on. And as I said, it's not the point of my presentation, but I very much wanted to emphasize it because I think it could be an interesting continuation for research. But now let's focus on my main point. So I listened to these songs and I try to isolate musical features that seem to me more recurrent and more relevant in the sense of being pertinent. By pertinence in semiotics, you mean that if you make the opposite, you don't have that message anymore. You don't have that kind of idea conveyed anymore. There were some that I was really expecting. I was pretty sure they would appear. So those are in the obvious column. And some that I did not expect, but not in a very big sense. They were still pretty predictable, but I just didn't think about them at the very start. So there was nothing madly surprising, I have to say. But still, there were a few that I said, okay, yeah, sure, of course. And then I would relate to them. So I isolated the 10 that I find more significant here in this list, and we are going to go through one by one. So first, are you in general familiar with music theory? How much of that? You tell me if I'm being too obscure in certain things. Are you familiar with the difference between major and minor key? So there is, in every scale, there is this third sound.
Mažoras ir minoras, tai yra linksmesnio pobūdžio dermė ir liūdnesnio pobūdžio dermė.
Yeah, that exactly. So there is this third sound in a scale, which is called characteristic, which depending whether it's one semitone high or down, it determines, so it's like, this is major, or this is minor. So you have chords like this. This is a major chord, or a minor. Now, already at instinctive level, I think you can already hear that the major chord is more positive, is brighter than the minor chord. So 48 out of 50 songs that I analyzed were actually in major key. And the two exceptions had to be very, so to speak, careful to meet all the other criteria in order to still be joyful, because this one was not met. So here is an example of a pretty well-known uplifting song, which, however, is in minor key. But you hear all the rest, and you understand why it's still a joyful song. Sorry, there will be a lot of song killing in the middle for time reasons, so I'll try to play more or less 1 minute per song, or at least to reach refrains or more catchy parts, because there is a reason. I'll tell you later. Okay, so this is an example. A similar line of reasoning goes for the so-called BPM, the beat per minute, how speedy, how fast is a song. So in the whole sample, basically, songs were moving between the area of 90 beat per minute and 220. So they were not too slow and not too fast, but more on the fast side. So when they were too slow, as you can imagine, this would sort of be a killjoy type of experience. And when they were too fast, they were actually triggering other emotional responses different from the pure joy, more related to energetic, dynamic, or again, workout, but not necessarily in a joyful sense. So basically, a 90 BPM goes like this, and a 220 goes like, which is roughly the distance between You Make Me Feel Like Dancing and Walking on Sunshine. Okay. Incidentally, these are two examples of this lyrical inclination to joy. So You Make Me Feel Like Dancing, and the other one, I'm Walking on Sunshine. So there's walk, there is dance, there is sunshine, etc. Now, next. Some linguists in the audience, I hope. You may or may not be aware of a linguist called Roman Jakobson, who worked on the functions of communication. He identified 6 of them, and one of them is so-called phatic. A phatic function means that it's the kind of function in communication that enhances the contact between the sender and the receiver, that establishes and promotes the interaction, the moment in which a sender and receiver really becomes engaged to each other. Now, if we think of music as a form of communication, we need to understand that, especially when we hear Spotify recorded albums, etc., we have a sender, which is the song, but the receiver is not really allowed to interact because you can't respond to a machine, really. So how do you actually create a communication? The song has some tricks that enhances the contact because they call for some interaction, for some engagement. So these are, for instance, sing-along passages, passages that you are invited to sing together, or guitar riffs that are so involving that you want to do some air guitar thing, or anything that makes your body move, you know, pa, 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 etc. Or you replace words with syllables or whistling so that you don't need to learn the words and it's easier, na, 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 etc. Then there is this other thing called hook. I don't know if you have ever heard of this in popular music language. A hook is the most attractive, most attention-grabbing spot in a song, which can be long, short, it doesn't matter, and it can be anywhere in the song. So with my students, I have a very scientific method to let them know where is the hook. I ask them to sing songs. Depending on where they start, people usually start from the hook. We can try. If I ask you to sing Yellow Submarine, most of you will start by We All Live In, which is not the beginning, but it's the hook. It's the most attractive moment of the song. If instead I ask you to, same with O Maile, you will probably start with the refrain. If I ask you to sing Yesterday, there's a high chance you will start from the yesterday word, yesterday, which is almost at the beginning, after the acoustic guitar introduction, and it's not the refrain, but that happens to be the hook. Or even better, if I ask you to sing Smoke on the Water by the Deep Purple, there's a high chance you will start with the guitar riff, dun, 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 because that's the hook of the song. So hooks are very central in feel-good songs because exactly they give you this attractive moment. They are so relevant that in feel-good songs you tend to have more than one type. And also so why is that? Because they exactly create this cooperation. Remember what we said about loneliness? A song with many phatic features, like many hooks, many sing-along, is a song that doesn't make you feel alone, because you are engaged in the song, you are interacting, you have a friend, a physical friend at that moment that is playing you something and with whom you are interacting, plus all the dancing physical stuff that you can do. So here is an example of a song that has like the ultimate feel-good song, which has 2 types of hook. One we hear at the beginning and in the middle, and it's a whistled part and also a ooh part instead of words. And the other one is the don't worry, be happy part. So. A special case of phaticness is actually redundance. Feel-good songs have a wider amount of repetition going on at various levels, melodic level, harmonic level, rhythmic level, than different types of song. I don't know if you are familiar with progressive rock as a genre, but there's basically no feel-good song in progressive rock because it's just too complicated, too variable to have that kind of effect. Now, again, repetition is fatigue because even if you don't know the song, you hear so many times the same thing that you start catching up quite quickly. So even if you're hearing for the first time, you find some kind of involvement. But also, it responds to an important biological function that was introduced by ethologists in the classic era, Konrad Lorenz, Nico Tinbergen, and so on, which is called Funktionslust. Funktionslust means literally pleasure of the function. That is, that we all find it pleasant to do things that we do well. Whenever we know we master some activity, we sort of enjoy doing it. You see it very well in kids. Kids do that a lot. When they learn something, they like to repeat it over and over. So when you have a repetitive song, you may experience Funktionslust. I'm going to play the repetitive feel-good song by definition because it's actually based on one single riff repeated over and over. And on which they built this band called XTC, build 3 different melodies, but it's actually always the same. And even if this is the first time you're hearing the song, I'm sure that if we go long enough, you will be singing, I'm stupidly happy, and we'll just catch up very, very quickly with that. Okay, another quite predictable topic is the fact that danceable and regular rhythms are preferred over more complicated ones. Now, this is very Western-centered because actually there are other cultures where so-called odd time signatures are actually more common. If we take the Turkish canto, most of these pop songs actually have 7/4 time signatures or 9/8, very particular ones. So it's very Western oriented, but still there is a tendency to do that. And in Western pop environments, we find 4/4 as the most regular and danceable rhythm, especially when it's expressed in a so-called 4-in-a-bar structure. 4-in-a-bar means that if the 4/4 bar has 4 beats, you make important units occurring exactly in correspondence of the beat. So you may have, I don't know, a piano accompaniment going like dun, 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 1, 2, 3, 4, instead of having strange arrhythmic parts. Or you can have the basic disco rhythm, which is bass drum on the first and the third beat, and snare drum on the second and the fourth. So I'm very glad to see so many of you moving physically while there are these songs, because otherwise the whole presentation would be a failure. Okay, next. There are genres that are more naturally inclined than others to produce joyful, feel-good songs. So, of course, many of the genres who were born for dancing functions, obviously, are like that. Plenty of Latin American rhythms, or ska, for instance, Obladi Oblada is a ska rhythm. R&B, like James Brown, I Got You. The same Omaile, which is a kind of a folk pop of a festive type. And very interestingly, there were genres that were born specifically with the function of generating good mood. And probably the most famous is the bubblegum pop, which was a genre that spread in the second half of the 1960s. And it was called bubblegum pop for two reasons. First, because the main target was young people in their early teens or even pre-teens. So bubblegum being an item that they would chew more very often, so it's an object they can relate to. But also because plenty of the titles and lyrics had sweet stuff in, as themes. So you would have titles such as Yummy, 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 Cherry in Your Tree, or the most famous of this genre, so this song has sugar, has honey, and candy. And you can see from the graphics of the, this is the original record cover. It's done with cartoons in Hanna-Barbera style. So clearly the target is very young people. It's like a Scooby-Doo cartoon type. More surprising thing is that lyrics, after all, are not so relevant in representation of joy in this kind of songs. Yes, most of the times you have things like Don't Stop Me Now, Can't Stop the Feeling, Rock With You, and all this dynamic, cheerful stuff, but not as a rule. So there is a slight majority of that, but you can also have very pretty sad lyrics, but set on a musical context that is so joyful that actually doesn't matter. And by the way, also the other way around is possible. You can have pretty positive lyrics and themes set into a rather melancholic music. And I think Lou Reed's Perfect Day is a very good example. It's difficult to get happy, even though the lyrics are about really somebody who is saving your life and making you live again, wanting to live again. So a very famous example of pretty sad lyrics is this one. Goes, you're old enough, some people say, to read the sign and walk away. So, it's pretty sad. Nevertheless, this is another Four in a Bar example. So you can hear the piano accompaniment. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, next, I'm heading to a conclusion. Another important thing, perhaps to music theory related, is the preference for simple and tonal harmonic structures. Now, as you may or may not know, in kind of traditional musical environments, there is a certain narrative movement of the harmony that has propositions such as beginning and development, question and answer, and a very important one is tension and release. We have functions that seem to be very stable and relaxing, So, for instance, in a scale of C, the chord of C major is a stable chord, and that's called the first degree. That's why you see those Roman numbers. Then you can, if you move to the fourth degree, which is the F major in the case of a C scale, you sort of get a lifting, and there is a little bit of movement. If you go to the fifth, which is G major in the case of the C scale, you start having a tension, and you want that tension to go somewhere, to be resolved. So you need, again, the C to release that tension. Now, unfortunately, I hurt my finger. I can't play really well, but I'll try to give you an idea. So this would be a C major. You see, I can't play with this. Okay, this. And then this would be a fourth degree. Then you go to the fifth. Let's go somewhere. There's and then we need to go here to go back. Another scientific method that I use with my students, I ask them to sing the scale, the do, re, mi, fa, sol scale for me, which is 7 notes. Would you believe me? I guess you will, because you can try it yourself. Nobody ever sings 7 notes. They always sing 8. You can't stop to the C note. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si. This is the end. But you just can't make it. You need that extra do later. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do. Because there is a kind of, we got somewhere. Now we can finally rest. Do you see what I mean? I think if you ask your friends to do that, they will always finish at, because we need that kind of release. Now, again, if you offer this release in a feel-good song, it's much better than leaving the tension, obviously. So there are so many songs who always play around these 3 functions, the first, the fourth, and the fifth. There are some examples here, and I'm playing yet another example of another song with pretty sad lyrics, because it's about 2 people who just can't stay together because the attraction is too damaging. But still, I'll follow with you. It goes slightly different on the refrain, a little bit richer, but then a refrain is a refrain, so it has already other attractive characteristics that help in that respect. Okay. Another one is minimization of the narrative element. Now, again, it may be a little bit complicated the way it sounds, but usually songs are structured with the strophe and refrain thing. Now, the strophe usually has a narrative function. It tells the story, and it builds up on that story. And usually the refrain offers some kind of, again, some kind of release, because it is more affirmative. Now, in feel-good songs, you don't want that much of a story. You want to go pretty quickly to the pleasant part. So, in a strophe-refrain structure, you usually get to the refrain pretty quickly. Otherwise, there is another structure called chorus bridge, where the pleasant part, the gratification, is actually at the beginning. And then you get a little bit of time for reflecting, so to speak. And that's called chorus bridge. With some colleagues, we jokingly called it the Catholic versus the Lutheran approach. The Lutheran is like, you have to work hard in life in order to get to heaven. So the strophe, refrain, long strophes. Think about, do you remember something like Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me by Elton John? The strophes really keep you on the rope for quite a while before finally going, don't let the sun go down. But the strophes are very long. And this is one reason why that is not a feel-good song, but it's more a melancholic one. The Catholic one is more like, let's have fun now. Then, if anything, we'll go to confession and we'll admit our sins. So, an example of a song, another typical feel-good song that starts with the chorus and then later goes to the bridge is I Got You by James Brown. And then the part that goes, when I hold you in my arms, that's a bridge. Next, another interesting thing that I found is that the productions tend to be very dry. There's less of this ambience, echo, delay, reverber, because that sort of triggers more ethereal feelings. So it may be more typical of the spiritual joy type, but when it comes to emotional and physical joy, usually productions are very dry, and performances go together with that. Performances are often towards the staccato, both instruments and songs. And this is a typical example. Can you hear beside the vocal part itself, which is pretty much in staccato, it's like Desmond has a barrow in the market. It's not like Desmond has a barrow in the market. And also the phrasing is stopped quickly. Desmond has a barrow in the marketplace, not plays. Molly is a sing. There's nothing like that. So you need to sort of jump a little bit. You can't stay too still on the song. So that's why there are hardly any melisma, hardly any fioritura, hardly any legato, any of this musical solution. And to conclude, what I call the ready, steady, go structure, sometimes, not as a rule, but pretty often, you can find songs that start in a way that is a bit not as joyful as the rest, but sort of giving the idea that, okay, something is about to happen. In that way, the feeling, the good feeling, becomes more evident because it is created as a contrast. So sometimes, for instance, remember, in Stupidly Happy, we have the riff starting alone, da 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 da, da 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 da, and then all the band comes in. So a sort of, okay, are we ready? Let's go. Or even more elaborate, which is my favorite example in this particular category, you can also have slow parts at the beginning and then make things really rock. So this is the example from which the title of my presentation is taken, by the way. And I think this is it. Thank you very much.